Talk to you today and hear about your uh, experiences in the military. What were you doing before you came a member of the military?
I was a wild and crazy guy. My father died when I was 13, and my mother moved back to New York, upstate New York, and I stayed in Arizona and California with some friends, and just I was like a loose cannon. So when I got my draft notice, it pretty much saved my life when I went in the Navy. I was running with some pretty tough kids in high school. I put myself through high school. Finally got myself straightened out a little bit, got signed up for college, and Tet Offensive happened, and they needed cannon fodder, so I got my draft notice and I ran to the Navy as fast as I could.
Why Navy?
My father was in the Navy. I've got a picture of him right here. This is a picture of my father. He was in World War II. He was a gunner's mate or an aviation structural mechanic, but he flew in the back seat of a Helldiver off of a carrier, and he was, the Navy is, I guess, all I've ever known. He was an engineer after he got out. So I went to the Navy, and I figured that if I was going to be having to serve, that I was going to serve with the elite of the fleet, and that's the submarine service.
Okay. Tell me about your boot camp training experience.
Boot camp was amazing. I left Arizona. I was in the delayed entry program in the Navy. So I left Arizona. I got drafted in Arizona. I left Arizona on December the 3rd. And from Arizona to Chicago is, a couple hour flight. Well, the Navy doesn't do that. They fly all over the country until you get to Chicago and you're so tired that you don't know what to do. Well, I left Phoenix. It was 82 degrees. I had on a pair of flip-flops and a t-shirt. I might have had a windbreaker on. And I landed in Chicago and it was snowing. And I was exhausted. It was midnight by the time we got into Chicago, and they put us all on a bus, and they took us to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center, which, and it's snowing like crazy. I'll never forget it. And I'm smoking a cigarette, standing out in front of the front gate. My hair was down to my elbows, and this chief came out and told me to put the damn cigarette out and get in line. So we got in line. I'm tired. When we walk into this building that was a pre-World War II barracks, and we had to fall in, and we had to stand there to get issued, to get processed in. And it was probably 1 o'clock by now, and I was so tired I didn't know what to do, and I leaned up against the wall, and this Master Chief Boatswain's mate with probably 30 years in the Navy came up to me, and I have never had my ass chewed so bad in my life. He said, get down on deck and give me push up until you can't move anymore. And I did, and they finally got us checked in, and they put us in this room with steam heaters, and we went to sleep, or tried to, and then an hour and a half later, a 55-gallon garbage can came rolling down the center of the barracks, said, time to wake up, we're going to chow. That was my first day in the Navy, right there. So then when they cut my hair off, I didn't see myself in a mirror for 3 days. And when I did, I looked like I'd just come out of a concentration camp. I mean, it was shaved. And I had never seen myself like that. So that was my first day in the Navy. But we were honor company in the Navy in boot camp. So, and I remember that, for graduation, they have big whole division or battalion or whatever they call it, parade. And we couldn't have any guests there because I had a spinal meningitis breakout. So they wouldn't allow civilians to see their sons graduate from the Navy. So we had an admiral and a captain and his wife sitting in the bleachers in this huge room, and 1,600 of us did our stuff, and that's my graduation. Went through Christmas in boot camp. I didn't go home for boot camp. So, and after boot camp, I went to basic electronics school, and that was a 10-week school crammed into 6 weeks. Well, I crammed it into 13 weeks because I was still having a good time. But during that time, some protesters were storming the main gate of the naval base, and they gave all the students, all the bus guys, they gave us nightsticks, and we had to go out and stand in front of the fence, and if anybody came close, we had to beat their heads in. Well, there was a bunch of them, and there was not enough of us, but we did the best we could. I'll never forget that, too. And then after electronics school, I went down to Torpedoman A School in Orlando, Florida, and that was probably 8 weeks, I guess. I can't remember, but that was a pretty good tour. And then from there, I went to sub school, and sub school was 13 weeks back then. No, sub school was 6 weeks back then. And sub school was the basic operations of a submarine. One of the criteria that we had to go through was a lot of psychological evaluations to make sure that we weren't claustrophobic or weren't going to kill somebody after a long time underwater. And we had to do an escape. They have a tower in New London, Connecticut. That's a 100-foot tower, and all it is a giant swimming pool, 100 feet deep. And there were 2 locks in this swimming pool. One was at 60 feet, and one was at 100 feet. And this was to train us to do submarine escapes. Well, the first one we did from 60 feet, you get in this lock and they flood it down, and you're wearing a life vest, basically. Nothing on your head, no air, no nothing. You take a deep breath, you push yourself out under the hatch, and you let go. And when you let go, you blow all the way up. That's called the blow and go. And if you don't do that, if you do not expel air the whole way up, then your lungs will rupture because air expands as the pressure decreases on the outside. So I did it from 60 feet, and I thought that was pretty neat. And then I wanted to do it from 100 feet. So I went down and did it from 100 feet twice. That was really cool. And the second time I went up, every time you come up, you're traveling at 475 feet per minute through the water. And about 20 feet before you break the surface, a diver grabs your ankles to slow you down. Otherwise, you'd go right through the roof. And then once you get out of the water, you have to go up to a Navy doctor and salute him and say, "I feel fine, sir." And I did it for my second run from 100 feet. Got out of the water, walked up to the Navy doctor, blood streaming down both my ears. I said, "I feel fine, sir," and boom, down I went. So I spent about 10 hours in a decompression chamber for that one. And then another time, they put a group of us into a chamber to take us down to a simulated depth of 8,000 feet to show us what it was like to breathe mixed gas. Well, the mixed gas was oxygen and helium. And our instructor was in there, and there was about 20 students in there. And he's telling us everything that's going on. He says, now the helium affects your voice. He said, and the first one that opens his mouth, I'm going to kick his ass. So they start pressurizing this chamber, and we're going down, down, down. The helium's coming in, the oxygen's coming in, and somebody cleared his throat. Well, helium makes you sound like Mickey Mouse, okay? So he goes like this, and everybody we just started cracking up, and it sounded like the Mickey Mouse Club on drugs. I swear to God, it was so funny. And I graduated. I slept through most of that school. But I graduated, I think, 6th in the class, and then I went to my boat. and I went to John Marshall in Holyloch, Scotland. Oh, yeah, I've got a picture of that boat somewhere. This right here is the USS John Marshall, SSBN 611. I was on the Gold Crew when I first went to it, but I rode it so long that by the time I left that boat, I was a senior qualified person on board. So I was, when I got to the boat, I was about 19, probably, but I was on that boat for 7 years. I took it we changed home ports a lot, and I took the boat from Holyloch to Rota, and then from Rota to the United States, and just we went all over. But we almost lost that boat, and it was a very old boat. It was in need of a shipyard real bad to get refueled. It was a nuclear boat, and we were in the North Atlantic, and we were at 400 feet, and I was asleep in the torpedo room, and all of a sudden the reactor plant just scrammed, just stopped, and the officer of the deck in that situation is supposed to proceed to periscope depth, which is 60 feet, and raise the snorkel mast so we could get the diesel going. The snorkel mast is basically an air intake for the diesel generator that is a 10-inch hull. And on top of the snorkel mast, there's what's called a head valve that opens and shuts. Every time water hits the head valve, a sensor senses the water and shuts the valve to keep the water out of the people tank, which is what we call the boat. So I had just woken up and I was going back aft to take a shower, and we had an auxiliaryman standing by the fan room because that's where the air intake comes into the fan room. And he starts screaming over his phone, "Shut the head valve, shut the head valve." Well, the head valve had stuck open, and the surface was a typhoon and state 7 seas, and we took 60,000 pounds of water through that snorkel mast into the fan room, and it burst the fan room door open. And before I knew it, I was waist deep in water, and that water was really cold. And we went from 60 feet to 800 feet that fast. And we had to emergency blow, and we got to the surface. But we were dead in the water for about 6 days, and I'll never forget that was Christmas. My Christmas dinner was a bologna sandwich because we didn't have any power. So we were taking 42-degree rolls. I went up and looked out the scope, and when you have number 1 periscope raised, it's like 60 feet over off of the surface of the water, and waves were breaking over that scope. And there were 60-foot troughs between the waves, and we almost lost it. I looked back in the torpedo room. We were carrying nuclear torpedoes, and one of the lashing straps that hold the torpedo on the loading skids popped off on one of the rolls, and me and the guy that worked for me it ran in there, and it's amazing how super strong you can get when you're scared, because that torpedo weighed 4,800 pounds. We put it back on the loading skid together and lashed it back down. So that was one of the interesting things. Another interesting thing we did once that I can talk about was the Yom Kippur War. We were over in the Mediterranean on patrol, on alert, covering targets. Back in those days, during the Cold War, we programmed our missiles to blow up our enemies, and they still do that, even though they don't admit it. But, so we were over in the Med, we were covering targets, and we came back out of the Med. Now understand, to go to the Mediterranean, if you're a submarine, when you come out of port at Rota, Spain, there is a Russian fishing boat waiting for you. with antennas everywhere, okay? So he's waiting for you. So you have to scare him a little bit so he goes away. And then we dove the boat and we went deep and we head over to the Straits of Gibraltar. And I was the chief of the watch at the time, and I could hear the sonarmen as we're going through the straits because we had to be real quiet because the Russians put 2 submarines on each side of the straits waiting for us, for somebody to come in. And so we kind of coasted in deep. And I'll never forget the sonarman coming over the 1MC over the control room loudspeaker, and he would go, con sonar, have a new contact, surface contact, designate Sierra 312. And that means he's had 312 ships that he has heard that we have to track while going through the straits. Well, we got through the straits. We found out after the patrol that the Russians were in the middle of changing their fleets. So there were Russians everywhere in the Med. And so we went all the way over and we covered our targets and we came all the way back out. And it was the first time we were going to take the boat back to the United States because it had been in Holylock and it had been in Rota for a long time. So we got halfway across the Atlantic. We went up to get a radio message, and then the message said, turn around, haul ass back to the Med. It's the Yom Kippur War has broken out. I think we're going to shoot, basically. So we armed everything. I thought we were going to go to war. The captain thought we were going to go to war. We hauled ass back through the straits, got all the way over to the Med. By the time we got there, they said, the war's over, come on home. So we came back across the Med, through the straits, disarmed everything, halfway across the Atlantic. And they said, we got a hurricane coming in, you're going to have to stay out another week. Well, by the time we got in port, I'd been underwater for 126 days. The only thing we had left to eat was saltine crackers. Our 8,000 gallon per day still broke. We make our own freshwater and nuclear boats, but our 8,000 gallon per day still broke about 2 weeks out. And our 3,000 gallon per day still had to be used to feed cooling water to the reactor plant. So nobody had a shower, nobody had a shave, nobody could brush their teeth, nobody could but we all smelled the same, so it didn't matter until we got into port and we pulled up at the pier and wives and girlfriends were all down at the end of the pier and we popped the hatch and came out of that, and it must have looked like Das Boot to them. I mean, we were just, I hadn't washed clothes, my sheets were so greasy that I could slide in them. So that was quite a journey, that one was.
So your trips were kind of surveillance of the waters when you were going around?
It depends on the boat. On this boat, when I first got there, we were actually covering missiles. We were covering targets. That has 16 Polaris missiles on it that are nuclear tipped, that are designed to blow things up, cities. So, but this was an unusual boat because, as I said before, we were going to go in the shipyard, but they couldn't decide where to put us. So they combined the crews because each Polaris missile submarine has 2 crews. One operates for 3 months, and then the other operates for 3 months. Well, they combined our crews and got rid of the people that we didn't need. And for 2 years, we operated as a special operations boat. We went down to St. Croix. That was tough duty. I was down there for 8 months, but we were going through the Devil's Triangle. And my division officer, his name was Lieutenant Palmer. This man was crazy. He kept hearing a 60-cycle hum. So he convinced the captain to surface the ship. And we surfaced the boat, and it was rougher than hell that day. And I hear on the 7MC, he calls down to the torpedo room, he says, He says, Smitty, says, I want you to grab 100 feet of air hose and a life harness and report to the bridge, and a grinder, an air grinder, and report to the bridge. And I'm like, oh my God, what is he going to do? You know, so I went up there, had 100 feet of air hose on me, had a life thingy on me and all this stuff. And he said, that ladder rung that's right at the edge of the sail, which is, the sail is a fin that comes right out of here. And the ladder rung was right at the edge of that fin. So he says, I want you to go out there and I want you to get on the Fairwater plane. I want you to cut that ladder rung off because that's where the 60 cycle hum is. I said, Mr. Palmer, it's rougher than hell out here. He said, don't worry, I'll keep a watch on the waves. Okay, so I start climbing over the side of the bridge onto the Fairwater plane, and a wave goes kaboosh and washes over us, washed me off the Fairwater planes. I was connected to the lifeline, beat up against the hull, and he goes, there's one, like that. So I finally cut that damn ladder rung off, and he said, okay, we're fixed, go the ship. We still had a 60 cycle hum. So there's no doubt in my mind that the Devil's Triangle really exists, all right? But when we got to St. Croix, a third of the crew would stay in port every day while the boat went out and did spec ops. And that was the first time I got to see my submarine dive, because the water there was so deep. You know, that we'd untie the boat, they'd back off about 100 yards and go and sink the boat. And you have to have 100 fathoms of water underneath your keel to dive that boat. That's 600 feet. So they would go maybe 100 feet off the pier and dive. It was pretty cool. So, but on the Hawkbill, which is this one, that's the Hawkbill. I was on there for a couple of years, and that was designed to be a spy ship. We did surveillance on this. We did surveillance on this. I've been further north in Russia on the John Marshall than probably the Russians have, but there have been submarines that have gone into the Barents Sea, and I can't say which ones, but have gotten within 300 yards of the Russian submarine piers, popped their scope up, took pictures, and got out. That's why the president doesn't know where his submarines are, because if that submarine gets caught, the president's got to be able to say, I don't know where they are. How am I supposed to know? He has a general idea, but he doesn't know. Vietnam service, I also qualified diver. I was a qualified diver, and I was qualified as explosives ordnance disposal. Vietnam experience really was limited, and I can't talk about a lot of it because we weren't supposed to be there. Part of the problem with being in submarines is we do secret stuff that we can never talk about and can never be awarded for. So, but that's okay because well, I mean, for example, we got a presidential unit citation, but it doesn't say why we got the citation. It says, basically it says, you guys did a hell of a good job, keep it up, you know. That's basically all they can say. But my dolphins, these here are my dolphins. And these are my original dolphins. And I got them aboard the John Marshall in 1972. That's when I qualified. They mean more to me than any other medal I could get. After I got out of the Navy, I got medically discharged from the Navy. I had 14 years in. I was also a teacher. I was an instructor, a weapons instructor in Hawaii for a while, and that was pretty interesting. I had to go through an instructor training course where we had to learn different idiosyncrasies of some of our allies, because we would have the Turks come in for instruction, or the Greeks, or the Japanese, or the whoever's. And I had one class come in, one side was Greek and the other side was Turks, and they hated each other. And I had to put them on breaks at separate times. They wouldn't go out the same door, so we had to have a classroom with two doors, because they'd kill each other. I mean, they would beat each other up. But we had to learn stuff like when you sit down, you don't ever point the bottom of your foot at somebody because they take offense at it. You never point at somebody or call on somebody with your left hand, because that's not the good hand. So it was pretty interesting doing that. And then I had a bunch of Australians come in one time, and their chief had 48 years in the Australian Navy, and they weren't letting him go back to sea again because he was old. I mean, the guy was ancient. So after class, they invited me down to their boat, and I went down to their boat and sat and had a can of Foster's, was there with their XO while they changed their clothes. And then we went up to the top 4 club, and that 48-year chief drank me under the table. They had to carry me home. My wife was so mad at me. And then the next day we had a beer softball game. Well, the Australians played softball. They came out there with cricket bats, for God's sakes. But they had more cans of Foster than I thought would ever fit aboard a submarine. And they put a 6-pack on each base, and they'd get up with these damn cricket bats and whack it and run to second base, because that's what you do at cricket. You run to second base. And then they drink 3 Fosters and come back. Well, by the second inning, I was paralyzed. I was so drunk I didn't even know what I was doing. They had to carry me home again. And then my wife hated the Australians. And then one time we had a beer ball game with the Japanese. Now, the Japanese, they had a submarine in, and they had to have special permission to take off on a Friday because they work 6 days a week. And they invited us to go down on their boat, and it was spotless clean. Spotless clean. It was a beautiful submarine. And I went back in the engine room, and here sat this gigantic diesel engine with a Kawasaki. And I made the mistake of asking the engineering officer where the Kickstarter was. And he didn't like that too much. But they came out to the ball game, and nobody spoke Japanese, and nobody spoke English. And they took baseball really seriously until they got enough sake in them and Kirin beer in them. I mean, by the 3rd inning, they couldn't give a crap less. And we just had a great time. So I remember a lot of that stuff. I remember one of my best friends was a SEAL who was pretty screwed up, and he used to drink peppermint schnapps after class. He would go over to the Arizona Club on Ford Island and drink peppermint schnapps and then tear the club apart. He had medals going over his shoulder, but he did 3 tours in Nam. He's pretty messed up. So.
Did the sub bother any of the people on it?
We had, on the Marshall, we had a couple of guys, we had to restrain them in their bunks. And one guy we had to put in a straitjacket and station a watch by him because he just totally lost it. When you're on a submarine, in those days, you are not allowed, you don't make phone calls, you don't get, there was no email, there was none of this crap. All you got was 5 20-word messages for the whole patrol from your family. And they would be screened, because the captain would screen the messages. If the radioman thought that it was bad news, they wouldn't give it to you. But we had a couple guys lose it on board, yeah, because they couldn't handle it. A lot of times when we went into areas that we weren't supposed to go into, we had to rig for ultra quiet, which means that if you're not on watch, you stay in your rack. You don't wear shoes, you wear socks, that's it, because any banging around can be heard from miles and miles. So, that's that's what it was. I mean, we were surveillance, and
How'd you have time to get married?
when I came to port, I mean, I got married before I went to my first boat. Um, Before I went
While
to
you
the
were
John
still in the
Marshall.
United States?
Right. Um, but now I don't know if it's still true today, but the divorce rate among submarine sailors is the highest in the services because there is no communications. My wife technically was not even supposed to know when I left. Technically, I was supposed to get up in the middle of the night, grab my sea bag, and go, and not come back for 6 months or whatever. So, but of course, all the wives knew more than probably the sailors did because they had their own way of doing things too. So,
How about your height? Is that a problem in itself?
well, I mean, after you bang your head enough, it's not a problem because you get used to ducking a lot. One time we had a casualty drill where I was playing a guy that was burned up or radioactive or something, and they had to put me, and we all had emergency breathing apparatus on that are hooked by air hose to breathing outlets. And they had to put me in a stretcher and take me through the watertight door. Well, I had this breathing thing on, and they're wrapping me up in this stretcher, and they said, all right, you ready? Let's take him out. And they took me through the door, unplugged the hose, and forgot to plug the hose in. And I couldn't get the mask off. So I almost literally was a casualty. But there was another time off of Holy Lock where we had to surface the boat because an ensign got appendicitis, and we had to air evac him. And me and the chief of the boat went up on deck, on the missile deck, which is this flat part right here. This is the missile deck right here. Well, the water in Scotland is very, very cold and very rough. And a helicopter came out, and we got the ensign up on deck, and we put him in the basket, and both me and the chief of the boat had a life harness on. And we got the guy off the boat, and a wave washed me and the chief over the side. And the water was ice cold, and we were beaten up against the hull. And by the time we managed to get back up, well, somebody had to help us up, but we went down below, and I was black and blue for 2 weeks. But the good part of that is the doc broke out the brandy, and we could have as much brandy as we wanted. So,
So you had a doctor aboard?
one patrol we had a doctor, a real live doctor. After that, no, we have corpsmen. We have independent duty corpsmen. A lot of the corpsmen that were in Vietnam came to submarines because they're very good. I mean, the corpsmen are very good. But we had one chief, senior chief corpsman on there, big fat guy, I can't remember his name. But the cure for him, and I don't care what you had, was gargle with salt water and you'll be fine. So you didn't even go talk to him much.
Okay. Did you have any good luck charms or special things you did for good luck?
Yeah. First off, halfway through the patrol, if the patrol is 90 days, halfway through 45 days out, we had a halfway night party on board. We'd have gambling and all this stuff, and it usually would be put on by the ship's welfare and rec committee. And we always ate very good. Our cooks were the best in the world. I mean, we had steak and lobster. We had all kinds of stuff. I remember one time my captain, he was a junior captain, went up to the admiral in charge of supply for the whole Mideast fleet or whatever, and he said, Admiral, he said, Navy bologna sucks. Because we used to get these big rolls of Navy bologna, and the next day we loaded individually wrapped packages of Oscar Mayer bologna the next day. My captain, we called him Crazy Bob, was the best captain I've ever served under. I mean, bar none. When we were in the Caribbean, he would, because we were drinking a whole lot of rum most of the time, but he would sit up on the con by the periscopes with his feet propped up on this little desk he had, and he'd be sound asleep like this, and we'd be at 400 or 500 feet, going along. And you'd think he'd be asleep, and his head would be down, and all of a sudden he'd wake up and he'd say, "Diving officer, I want to go fast." He wouldn't say make 21 knots, or we wouldn't say, "Yeah, I want to go fast." So, man, we put the pedal to the metal, and balls to the walls until he told us to slow down. And then, he was just a great, great guy. One time we got underway from St. Croix with the XO's wife's bra hanging off a #1 scope. That was, it was great. Crazy Bob, we tied up at St. Croix, and right as soon as you tie up, you get swept call right there because the water is like 85 degrees and it's beautiful. You can see all the way to the bottom. And we kidnapped the captain and took him up to the sailplane. Sailplanes are these. These are the Fairwater planes right there on the sail. And we took him up on top of the Fairwater planes, and we had a hold of him, and the XO was yelling at us, "Put the captain down, put the captain down." And the captain said, "This is my fucking submarine. If I want to be thrown over the side, I will be." And off he went. Off he went. The captain loved us. My captain loved us. And he was the best captain I ever had. But as far as Lucky Charms, I forgot to tell you, we had the halfway night, but also we made short timer chains, which was a paper clip chain. We made this chain out of paper clips, and each paper clip was the amount of days we had left at sea before we get home. So every day you'd take off a paper clip. We also wrote to our wives and girlfriends patrol books, because we couldn't send mail, so we wrote every day something in our patrol books. I don't know if I have any left of them. We had this guy on my boat we were doing a DESO shot down in Florida, in Cocoa Beach, but this guy was a missile tech, and his name was Beasley, and he was gay. There was absolutely, and he didn't hide it, and everybody knew it. And back then, that's something, but he had red hair, orange hair. He was a beautician on the outside, okay? So he was our ship's barber. But he was one bad dude. He would swish through the missile. He was real feminine acting. And one time, we all went out drinking in Cocoa Beach, and I was about half crap, shit-faced, and had to go to the bathroom, and went in, and here's Beasley holding this guy up against the wall, just beating him to a bloody stump. This guy's face was terrible. So I pulled Beasley off. I said, "Beasley, what did he do? What are you doing to this guy?" And he said, "He called me a fag." And I said, "Well, you are a fag." And he said, "Yeah, but only you guys can call me that." So, and after I got off the boat, I know this isn't politically correct, but this is the way it was. And after I got off the boat, I heard that he went over the hill and married some other guy in Los Angeles. So that was pretty weird.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yeah. I'm glad I'm not in the service now. I'm glad I'm not in the Navy now. I have nothing against women serving on a combat line, doing whatever they have to do. But a woman aboard a submarine that has been underwater for 60 days is not a good idea. They've already had some women bounced off of the boats for various reasons. But I think that's bad. I think it's a mistake to have them there. I also think that we get involved in way too much stuff without putting an end to it. When we were in Vietnam, our government did not understand that the Vietnamese have never been beaten, ever. not by the Chinese, not by Kublai Khan, not by anybody. Now by the French, they have never been beaten. And the reason that they've never been beaten is because they don't care how many you kill. We killed millions of Vietnamese, millions of them, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter. They just kept coming, and they wore us out politically. I mean, there was absolutely no doubt that militarily we won that war. I mean, we won almost every battle that we were in with the Vietnamese. But they just have never been beaten. And the same goes with the Afghans. The Mujahideen are some of the toughest people in the world in Afghanistan. And they beat off 150 Russian divisions. They beat them. And here we are for 10 years. You know, I've got 5 friends of mine are on the wall in the Vietnam Wall downtown. And it took me years before I could go down there. And we're going to have another wall. We're going to have walls until these people realize that they're throwing away lives, and you don't use war unless it's an absolute last resort. But how are you going to negotiate with a person, with people, when our ambassador doesn't even speak their language? So yeah, my feelings about war and the government have changed a lot.
Yeah, that gets you so McCain just to go in Syria.
Yeah. Well, I don't care. I don't mind going into other countries or whatever if we have to. But there's 2 things happening here. First thing is we got to make sure it's in our best interest. And second off, if we're going to do it, we ought to go in and do it. For example, as far as I'm concerned, and maybe this is a bad thing to say, but Afghanistan, the only way you're going to win that war is to nuke them. That's it. The only way you're going to win that war is to nuke them. North Korea, for example, they huff and puff and all this other crap. You park a Trident submarine off of their coast and say, make my day. One Trident submarine could blow up half the world. So, you know,
We have the capability.
oh my God, one submarine. We just don't have the nuts. One submarine is you can consider it a nuclear country. One submarine. The captain of a ballistic missile submarine is the most powerful man in the world when he's at sea. The most powerful man in the world. It takes a presidential order to release nuclear weapons, no doubt. But it's that captain that makes it happen. He's the most powerful man in the world.
Did you have any problems with
Yeah.
protesters?
Protesters?
No.
Well,
People's opinion of you when you're in uniform.
yeah, a couple things. First off, when I flew into San Francisco, I was met by the Students for Democratic Society, SDS, and they spit on me and called me baby killer and all the rest of this stuff. And it's really interesting because I went to work for a company as the IT director down in Silver Spring, and when Obama won the presidency, the company is owned by an Indian woman who's a visionary, and she's very intelligent and all. But when Obama won the presidency, she called all the directors together, and because she was so happy. What do you think of this? What do you think of this? Well, of course they were all, very liberal Democrats. When it came around to me, I said, I think any time a president is elected, it's a good thing for America because it shows that we can exchange power without killing each other. That's all I said. But then it got to this one guy who is a spitting image of Art Garfunkel. I mean, spitting image. He's got the hair. He's got the whole bit going on. And he said, well, I'm a little bit more liberal than the rest of you. I was in the SDS, and when he said that, I wanted to kill that man. And I never spoke to him again. And I went and told my boss, don't ever do that to me again. And she didn't get it. But yeah, that affected me a lot. And there were, when I got out of the service, um, I drank to go to sleep. That was the only way I could go to sleep. And when my liver was about hanging at my kneecaps, I finally said, well, I better do something about this. And I went to the Frederick emergency room, and they admitted me and put me in the psych ward for 5 days. And my doctor, who is still my doctor today, sent me up to rehab in Emmitsburg at Mountain Manor. And I said, you know, they send you to group therapy and all this stuff, and I'm sitting in the group therapy with a bunch of heroin addicts and a bunch of alcoholics and this woman psychiatrist. And, you know, she'd ask questions and I wouldn't say anything. And finally she came to me and she said, well, how come you're not participating? And I said, lady, you wouldn't understand one thing of what I've been through. Not one thing. You wouldn't know what it's like to have a body bag stuffed in the freezer because you can't surface. Or you wouldn't know what it's like to not hear from family for months at a time. You have no idea. So they brought in a Vietnam veteran who came back from Vietnam. He was airborne. No, he was air cav, and he had been shot up in helicopters and all this stuff, and he was a massive cocaine freak. And when he came back from Vietnam, he would beat his wife up and just go crazy. Well, he finally got treatment, and he finally got licensed as a counselor. And he came in to the room, just me and him, and he said, okay, Doug, what's wrong? And as soon as I let it out, it just, I mean, the tears just flowed out of me. It's still hard to talk about. And I was in rehab for 21 days, and I left, and I've never picked up anything again, ever. So, you know, I probably suffered from some form of post-traumatic stress. And then I was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day up until 10 years ago, and I woke up on the 4th of July, and there was a half a pack of cigarettes on that table, and I picked them up, threw them away, and never picked up another one. So it's almost like when my body says that's enough, that's enough. But I had to deal with whatever was going on in my head in order to sleep, because I mean, I would wake up in cold sweats rigging my bedroom for collision, and you know, just weird stuff. So.
How about your hearing?
Hmm?
How about your hearing?
My what? I've ruptured both eardrums.
From the sub?
From diving in the sub, yep. Ruptured both eardrums. I wear a hearing aid in each ear. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I have severe tinnitus in this ear. Sounds like a bumblebee going all the time. But you know, you live with it. A lot of times not being able to hear is an advantage. My wife calls it selective hearing, but that's okay. I mean, I've been divorced. I was divorced from my first wife because, I mean, you'd go to sea for 90 days and you come back and you try to be the husband again and the father and the dad and the boss and all this, and then turn around and leave again. And it just didn't work out. So, but the woman I'm married to now, I've been married for 31 years and we're doing good.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, there is. I was going through some of my old Navy stuff. This here is a picture of me when I was in Torpedoman A School. That's me right there, I think. That's when I was in A School down in Orlando. I mean, I didn't even know I had some of this stuff still. I've still got my boot camp book, whatever they call it. And
The book you talked about, is that like a diary so that when you get back home, you get to write?
that's what a patrol book is, yeah. This is one of my diving certifications. But the thing that I'm proudest of most is a very simple piece of paper. There's that. And that was given to me the day I qualified. Yep. And in order to qualify, you have to learn how to operate every system on the boat. Because you've got to figure that if there is a casualty on that submarine, then the people on that boat, you depend on each other to save your life. Literally. I mean, I could be in the engine room. And if I didn't know what valve to turn and we had flooding, all of a sudden, the boat might sink. So it didn't matter what your rate was. It didn't matter anything. What mattered is you learned the boat so you could save each other's life. This is...
Is there more than one of you?
I'm sorry?
Is there more than one of you that's qualified like that on the boat?
Yes, everybody who's on the boat.
Everybody.
When you first go to a submarine, you're not qualified. You have to go to literally learn that submarine. And once you learn the submarine, then a qualifying officer walks you from the bow to the stern inside, pointing at stuff and saying, what is that, what is that, what does that do, what does that do, like that. And once you pass your board, you go through a board. Once you pass your board, then you're awarded your dolphins by your commanding officer. But everybody has to be qualified. People that are not qualified do not stay on the boat. They're thrown off.
I mean, that Memorial Park is great.
Yeah. There's a picture hanging on the wall there, but I've been district commander and two-time base commander of the United States Submarine Veterans Incorporated Tri-State Base. Tri-State Base represents Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Well, there's Memorial Park in Frederick that's right across from the Armory that has monuments to World War II veterans and has monuments to Korean War veterans and Vietnam veterans and Iraqi veterans and everybody else. Revolutionary veterans. And there's still people buried in that park too, by the way. But there was never ever anything there for submarine veterans. So when I was the base commander, I went to the mayor, Jenny, was that her name? Jennifer. Went to Jennifer, the mayor of Frederick, and I said, I want to put a memorial stone to the submarine veterans who died for this country, and I want to put it right there. And she said, okay, fine, do it. So I raised the money in 7 months, and I put the stone in there, and it made all the other veterans really angry. And now every year we participate down there on Veterans Day, and when they place the wreaths in front of the memorials, they just announce new submarines, and I've told the American Legion 5 times to call us what we are, call us United States Submarine Veterans, but they don't do it. So it's because they don't understand and they don't know. It's like the Korean guy, the president of the Korean veterans, got really ticked off at me because I put the stone there, and I asked him, I said, well, when were you in Korea? And he said, oh, I never went to Korea. He said, I was stationed along the Mississippi. And I said, oh, I'll bet not one single North Korean invaded the Mississippi River, did they? I said, but you know what? I said, there were submarines sitting right outside Pusan protecting the people that fought there from getting infiltrated from sea by the North Koreans. So don't tell me about this shit. And the United States Submarine War Veterans, or United States Submarine Veterans now have a war fighting status in Congress. So we've been awarded that status. And that's my citation for my Navy Achievement Medal. It's a little yellow because I'm pretty old, but